What is your name?
Seth Cook,
And Seth, where are you currently employed?
Panola County Sheriff's Office,
And how long have you been there?
since August 1st.
Back in December of 2014, where were you employed?
I was working for Mill Lake Farms.
And were you a volunteer firefighter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And where were you a volunteer firefighter?
Cortland Fire Department.
And how long had you been there?
Maybe a year.
And were you at the Cortland Fire Department around a little bit after 8 on Saturday night, December the 6th, when a call came out about a fire?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember what the nature of the call was?
The tone came through on the radio, and dispatch said it was a vehicle on fire in a field near the tree farm in Cortland on Heron Road.
Were you familiar with that area?
Not at the time.
Who was at the fire station with you?
It was me, Cole Haley, and Jody Morris.
In which direction would you head, or which direction did y'all head from the fire department to get to where you were toned out to go?
When we left the fire department, we turned west on, I guess it's considered Main Street right there, and then it turns into Heron Road.
Okay. And who was at the fire station? I should have let you finish a minute ago. Who was at the fire station when the tone came out?
Just myself, Cole Haley, and Jody Morris.
And which truck did you get in?
Our chief told me and Jody to respond in our brush truck because they did say the vehicle was on fire in a field. And that time of the year, it was kind of wet. And in order to be able to get to it, the truck's four-wheel drive. It's lighter than an engine. So we took it. That way we'd be able to get to the vehicle.
And I assume the brush truck has got water on it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. How long did it take you to get from the station to where the car was on fire?
Probably anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes.
Is it very far?
It's not far at all.
Okay. And tell the jury what you found upon your arrival at the scene.
As me and Jody were pulling up, we could clearly see the vehicle was on fire on the left side of the road, just inside of a private drive. As we were pulling up, our eyes were on the vehicle, assessing what we had at the time. And
describe to the jury the position of the car and what you observed about where the fire was in or outside the car.
The vehicle was pulled up in that private drive, and it had been turned and parked parallel to a fence right there. When we pulled up, the vehicle, all the fire appeared to be contained inside the vehicle. I couldn't remember if there was flames coming out from under the hood or the trunk compartment at the time. One thing I did notice, the driver door was open about halfway, and nothing registered in our minds then about it. We pulled the vehicle up into the private drive close to the car, and my turnout jacket was in the bed of the truck. As soon as I opened the door to get out, that's when I looked back towards the west, and you could see a silhouette of someone coming out of the woods. At the time, we were unsure what exactly it was, but it looked like the silhouette of a person.
Were you in the driver's side or the passenger side?
I was in the passenger seat.
Okay. So the silhouette that you saw would have been on your side of the car, of the truck?
Yes, sir.
And just tell the jury a little bit about this silhouette. What did it look like?
It was probably 30 or 40 feet down the road from us on, I guess it would be on the north side of that road. And we really didn't have that much lighting out there. It was dark. The only lights you had were the light bar on top of the vehicle, and our headlights were facing south, so we really didn't have any kind of lighting on the silhouette of the person. We were unsure what was going on at the time, so we got back in the brush truck and backed up in the road to try and get some headlights on the silhouette, and that's when you could tell it was a person walking towards us.
What did you tell Jody when you first saw the silhouette? I assume Jody was with you, right?
Yes, sir.
What did you tell Jody when you first saw the silhouette?
I just bumped Jody on the arm and said, "Hey, man." I was like, "I don't know what this is," walking down the road towards us. And so that time we were unaware of what was going on. For our safety, we just wanted to back up and get some lights on that silhouette so we could see what was going on.
Okay. And once you got lights on the silhouette, tell the jury, please, what you saw.
We could tell it was a female with hair. Hair seemed to be kind of frayed out, like someone had taken their hands and ran through it. And you couldn't really tell if she was wearing any clothing at that time until she got closer to us. And when she got closer to us, you could tell the only thing she had on were panties.
And what did y'all do at this point?
About that time, Cole was pulling up in the engine, and we both approached towards her. And when Cole pulled the engine up, she came around to Cole's side of that engine, and we pulled the brush truck back into where we had originally pulled up at.
Okay. What did you notice about her? You described her hair, and you described all she was wearing was panties. What was her condition as she got closer to y'all?
She looked like she was very dazed, like in a trance. She was having trouble walking.
Did you notice the burns?
Not until they got up close to her. You could tell she had burns on her. Her skin it just looked like some really bad sunburn. Her skin was kind of peeling back in places.
Did y'all immediately at this time begin to try to help her?
Yes, sir. They got a blanket out of the engine 81, and I stood right there while they got her laid down on a blanket behind the engine. And then at that time, I think I was still a rookie on the fire department, and we didn't have enough people there to fight that vehicle fire. So I was told to grab a hose line and just contain the fire to keep it from spreading into the tree farm.
Is that what you did?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any verbal contact with this girl?
I did not.
Did you know who it was?
Later that night, I did.
Okay.
But at the time, I did not know that's who it was.
Did you know Jessica?
I went to school with Jessica.
Okay. And were you able to recognize her?
No, sir.
Okay. Was her condition that bad?
I would say so.
Did anybody else come up and help you fight the fire?
Later, it was several minutes after Will Turner showed up, and he helped me, and we worked on putting that vehicle fire out.
And did you at any point in time go back and speak with Jessica or have any conversation with her?
No, sir.
Okay. Tender the witness, Your Honor.
Cross.
You indicated that you were a rookie back at that date.
Yes,
back
ma'am.
in December of 2014. You didn't have an opportunity to fill out a separate report or anything like that.
No, ma'am.
Said that the lighting was pretty low, pretty bad at that time. You agree with that?
Yes, ma'am. It was dark.
And at the point that you saw Miss Jessica walking out of the street, you said it was 30 to 40 feet coming out of the woods area?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So first you saw the woods and then on the street after that?
Yes, ma'am. She was on the north side of that road, kind of coming out of the woods to the road.
Thank you. I tend the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
What instructions would you give Mr. Cook?
He may be fine with release.
Sir, you find excused, you can return to the courtroom, return to duty, or your choice, sir. May call your next witness.
State your name for the record.
Daniel Cole,
And Daniel, where are you currently employed?
Panola County.
In what capacity are you employed with Panola County?
I'm the Director of Emergency Operations, Panola County,
And are you also a longtime firefighter?
since 1991.
I believe you got out of the fire department when you took your current position. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did
Yes.
you respond to the scene on Heron Road on December the 6th of 2014?
I did.
When you arrived on the scene, tell me what you saw.
I pulled up on scene because of where I was, I went in my personal vehicle. I pulled up on scene. See a female laying at the back of Cortland's fire truck that was heavily burned.
Do you know Jessica Chambers?
I do not.
Who was there on scene with her at the time?
There were two Cortland's firemen, and I think they were Cole Haley and maybe Jody Marsh were there. When I got there, there was another fireman there, but he wasn't with her. I remember two people being there with her.
You mentioned a girl being on fire. Would you describe exactly what she looked like to this jury?
Well, she wasn't on fire, but she had been burned when I got there. She was sitting on a blanket, maybe a fireman's coat or vice versa. She was, hair was singed. Just soot all around her nose and her mouth. When I tried to speak to her, it was difficult. It appeared as though maybe her tongue was real thick. Her lips were constricted. There was red, splotchy places from where the blistering had occurred all over her body.
Did you attempt to speak to her?
I did.
What type of information did you attempt to obtain?
Tried to obtain who she was.
And
And
how did she respond when you asked who she was?
it took multiple attempts, but we got Jessica. We didn't start with Jessica. At one time, to me, it sounded like a Katina, a Katrina, a Courtney. It was a very chaotic scene. There was a lot of noise. She wasn't speaking very loudly. At one point, even laid down beside her just to get close enough to her to try to hear some of the things the questions, and everything. Some things she said was clearer than others.
As you talked to Jessica, did you know that something was wrong on that scene?
To be honest with you, when I got there and saw her, once we established who she was, I asked her. I said, I don't even know if I asked her what happened. I think I just asked her who did this
And
or what happened. Maybe that's what I asked.
was she still speaking in the same manner you described before?
Yes, she had the more questions we asked, she would start out strong, and then it would get extremely breathy, very difficult to understand.
Now, you did write a statement, and in your statement, you were able to obtain some information from her. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell me what you heard and how you heard it.
Well, we got her name finally, and we then when we asked, who did this, it took multiple attempts, but I did hear Eric did this to me. Eric set me on fire. That's what I heard.
And was MedStat called, obviously?
Yes,
Ultimately, was she flown out to the regional medical center?
she was.
Now, after your conversation with the sheriff's department and based on your training, did you take any photographs on the scene?
I took one photograph. It was kind of a bust-style picture, and I didn't know how far out the law enforcement response was, and wanting to obtain as much information as we could before she left the scene, I did take a single picture basically from her shoulders up.
And you've seen some other pictures the sheriff's department took, correct?
I have.
And were you able to identify those pictures as what you saw that night of Jessica Chambers?
I sure can.
Is this photograph you mentioned to me in Chambers? All right, and defense has seen this photograph.
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
All right, any objections to its admission?
None, Your Honor.
All right, you may display the photograph.
Daniel, I'm going to show you two photographs. Can you describe and identify these photographs for me?
Yes, sir. There's the picture on the right. It's the one I took of Jessica Chambers on the scene.
And the picture on the left?
It's a picture that I think one of the deputies may have taken, but I recognize it.
This is the condition that Jessica Chambers was in on December 6, 2014 when you were attempting to speak to her.
That is correct.
Daniel, in the condition Jessica was in, how difficult was it to get her to speak?
It was a struggle. At one point, I personally got frustrated because it was hard to hear her. And at the same time, I think she was equally as frustrated because we was asking the same questions over and over again.
Describe the scene and the attitude of the other firefighters on scene.
I mean, like I said, it was chaotic. Everybody was wanting to do something to help. I mean, there was people stepping over one another. You know, it just was people everywhere. There was people nervous, not knowing how, who, what, where, when. They were worried about people, you know, being close by, looking, seeing, you know, worried about their own safety. It was chaotic. I don't know how, I mean, this was the first time any of us have been involved in something like this.
And did you stay there on scene until help arrived with MedStat?
MedStat had arrived, and I left the scene to meet Panola 1, Sheriff Darby, to go make notification to the family, and we followed the ambulance down to the landing zone.
And did you, in fact, go with Sheriff Darby to notify Jessica's parents of what had happened?
We did. I did.
Your Honor, I tender the witness.
All right. Cross?
I believe you testified that you got a call from Panola County 911. It was about 8:20 or so.
Yes, ma'am.
And the fact that you were at your in-laws, what time do you think that put you there? 8:25, something like that, on the scene?
I would say from the time I received the call to the time I made scene, strictly guesstimation because I don't have the times in front of me, I would say probably 2 to 2.5 minutes.
Okay. So 8:23.
Yes, ma'am.
When you got there, you saw who you thought to be Cole Haley and Jody Morris,
Yes, ma'am.
and just one other fire person. That would have just been Seth. Do you know him?
But I know who he is.
So at that point, there was no other individuals there.
You know, I can't tell you that 100%. Like I said, when I pulled up, I'm not going to say that there wasn't another fireman. I don't recall from memory.
They were rendering aid, though.
Yes,
Jody Morris and Cole Haley were rendering aid to Miss Jessica, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I know Jay asked you about the fact that you did do a report back then. You
Yes.
agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You talked a little bit about talking to Jessica,
Yes, ma'am.
correct? And would you agree with me? Your report is pretty detailed. You agree with that?
Well, I mean, yes, ma'am. It states the basics of what happened.
Yes. And if you look through it, it also indicates where things that Miss Jessica stated to you, you put that in quotes.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, if you will, go to the second paragraph of that statement.
Mm-hmm.
You see where it says, I responded to the scene.
Yes, ma'am.
Start reading there for me.
And found Cortland and Station 14 fire departments on scene, extinguishing the car and a couple of firefighter EMRs rendering aid to a female patient. I approached the patient and started asking who she was. She stated Jessica. I asked Jessica who, and after a couple of times of not hearing her, she said Chambers.
Okay. And if you would please go to the next paragraph, read that for me.
I then asked what happened, and Jessica responded saying, Eric set me on fire.
Is that in quotes?
Yes, ma'am.
So back then you did this report about 12 hours, I think you said, after everything happened. Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
correct?
That is correct.
And is the Eric set me on fire in quotes?
Yes, ma'am.
Continue reading for me.
I asked Jessica again what happened, and she stated multiple times, Eric set me on fire. I then asked what was Eric's last name, and Jessica responded, I don't know. It's not in quotes because, I mean, that's what I got out of what she was saying, and she was kind of shrugging her shoulders.
Now, in those two paragraphs, did you indicate anything about her telling you that her name was Katrina or Courtney or anything like that?
No, ma'am. I didn't put it in my report.
Okay.
The report was written within 12 hours of a very traumatic, chaotic scene, and it was omitted in my report.
And the purpose for writing a report right after something happens is so that you can record it when it's fresh on your memory, correct?
Well, typically I would wait a little longer to process everything that went on. I was asked to get this report turned in ASAP, so I did.
And at the point that you did it, you put details as specific and quotes about Eric set me on fire.
Yes, ma'am, I heard that.
So your first opportunity to talk to Miss Jessica was when she was on the ground behind the fire truck, correct?
Correct.
And actually, you had another opportunity to speak to her. You agree with that?
Yes, ma'am. I approached her again in the ambulance where
Yes.
it was not as noisy.
Okay. If you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph down there.
I then went to the ambulance to where the two ambulance personnel and firefighter paramedic Casey Austin was prepping Jessica for transport to the landing zone. I asked her again, who did this? And she said, Eric did. He set me on fire. And I asked Eric who? And again, got the same response, like she didn't know. The 3 medical personnel acknowledged that they had heard what she'd said, and I exited the ambulance.
Yes. Thank you. And I believe that you indicated her breathing was somewhat labored.
Her breathing was labored, her speech, she struggled to get out everything she got. Now, to tell you that some of it wasn't clear, I'm not going to say that. I mean, you could understand some things she said, but not everything.
Yes, sir. And but certainly the things you did understand her to say, you put that in the report.
I did. Quotes.
Now, your report indicates that you also gave this same information that's in your report. Eric set me on fire. Eric, I don't know his last name. What's in here? You stated that to law enforcement. I think Edward Dixon, I believe.
There's Edward Dixon or Panola 10 or Panola 22, which would be Panola 10 would be Darrell House. Panola 22, I think, is Maurice Market. I'm not sure exactly who. I know I gave it, I'm more than positive I gave it to Edward Dixon, but I also verbally related to the other two.
Now, Mr. Cole, you were also given some information that from 2 of the, or at least one of the other firefighters, Cortland Fire, that there was a suspicious person on the scene. You recall getting that information?
Yes, ma'am.
And let me make sure I had the name. It would have either been, Will Turner?
I know Will Turner, yes, ma'am.
You do. And he's with Cortland Fire Department,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
And I'm sorry I couldn't hear you.
Yes,
sir?
ma'am. I
Okay.
do.
And then Brandy Davis, I believe. You know him as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And they gave you some information that they thought they had seen a suspicious older black male on the scene of the fire. You agree with that?
Yes, ma'am. Seems like I do recall them telling me that.
Yes. And they went as far as to give you a tag number of this
Yes, ma'am.
person that they thought was out there. You
That's
received
correct.
that?
I do remember receiving the tag number.
I would send it to witness, Your Honor.
All right, redirect.
Ms. Palmer also asked you about a suspicious black male being on scene. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Unsuspicious male.
Yes.
I'm not sure how she referred it. How large is Cortland?
1 square mile.
Something like this happens, you got a lot of nosy people around?
Yes, sir. On anything.
Were there a lot of people out that night?
There was.
And did you, along with other firemen, attempt to secure the area of the scene?
As best we could. I mean, I didn't. I was tending to Jessica and trying to figure out who she was and who might have done it.
And let me ask you a question based on your experience in securing crime scenes. Does that sometimes include running people off?
It does.
You stated in your report what you said you heard. You've already testified. Is that correct? Is that correct?
That's correct.
You've already testified as to the condition that Jessica was in her speaking.
Yes.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Mr. Cole, you're finally excused. You can leave or you may remain in the courtroom. Your choice, sir. Thank you. All right.
What is your name?
Brandy Davis.
And Brandy, are you a volunteer firefighter with the Cortland Fire Department?
Yes, sir.
Or did you receive a call out or tone out on the evening of December the 6th of 2014? What was the nature of the call out that you received?
The initial tone was a car fire at the tree farm.
And did you in fact respond?
I did.
And tell the jury what you heard on the radio while you were responding to the scene.
I heard Jody Mars come over and what went from a car fire in a tree farm to a vehicle on fire with a female severely burned and in the road as well.
How was Jody, or how were you perceiving what Jody was saying on the radio? Could you hear the tone of his voice?
Yes, sir. Very well.
And what was going through your mind as you were hearing the tone of his voice?
I knew something. He was in some kind of trouble, or it wasn't just an ordinary call.
And what did you find upon your arrival at the scene?
No, I found Jessica standing initially, and they, I told them as the EMR, we needed to get a blanket around her. They told me somebody's going for a blanket. I went for my turnout jacket. We put the blanket around her, and I put my turnout jacket over. As we laid her down near the fire truck.
Describe for the jury the assessment that you were making of Jessica and what you observed about her when you first began to look at her.
Walking on the scene, she was standing. I could see, her back, high first degree burn, some second. Laying her down whenever I started to talk to her. Because EMR, there's not a whole lot that could have been done from my standpoint until further EMS got there. Talking was the best way to judge airways, breathing, and things like that, as well as comfort.
And did you begin to talk to her?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, and what did you say to her?
I asked her name, and she replied, Jessica. I said, Jessica who? And she said, Chambers. And just, basically in conversation, I asked her, I said, I'd already been advised that this was pretty much a crime scene from Jody Mars. And I asked her, I said, baby girl, who done this to you?
Did she respond?
Yes, sir.
And what did she say?
She said, Eric.
And did you continue to talk to her?
Sir?
Were you able to keep her talking?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was her, I guess for lack of a better word, what was her health status as you were sitting there with her? I believe you testified a moment ago there wasn't much you could do for her.
Right.
Is that right? Why is that?
It's just burns of that nature in the field. It's beyond my capabilities to do anything other than package the patient.
How would you describe the distress that she was in?
She was a fighter. She was trying to answer questions. She was trying to tell us, who she was. pretty outstanding if you ask me.
What about the vehicle itself? Did you observe the vehicle?
After the fact,
Okay.
I went up there and made sure it wasn't, that was only her in there.
All right, you got to speak up now.
After we had packaged her and got her to the landing zone,
Okay.
I briefly looked, to make sure it was no other patients in the vehicle, or, if we was changing over to recovery.
When you arrived at the scene, was the fire still going?
To the best of my knowledge.
Do what now?
To the best of my knowledge.
And when you went back up there, was the fire out after Jessica had been packaged and taken to the landing zone?
Yes, sir.
You also, I believe, mentioned that you observed somebody there at the scene at some point in time when you were there. Is that correct?
It was brought to my attention, yes, sir.
Okay. And also, I believe you went down and confronted this person. Is that correct?
No, sir, we did not confront the person.
Okay. Did anybody in your presence tell this person to move on out of there?
And not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I mean, not in my physical sight, no, sir.
Did you obtain a tag number?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you turn that over to
Daniel
Daniel
Cole,
Cole?
yes, sir.
tender the witness, Your Honor?
Cross?
Good morning, Mr. Davis.
Morning.
If you could, I was sitting on the other side of the room. Could you speak up just a little bit more?
Yes, ma'am.
For my sake, for sure.
Ma'am.
And
Sorry.
then everyone I know can hear you. Thank you for that. I have a few questions for you this morning. You agreed that basically you were the first EMR firefighter on scene.
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, yes.
Yes. And when you got there, first person you spoke with would have been Jody Mars.
Yes, ma'am.
And he was there and he advised you of what the scene situation was.
Right.
And there was also, I believe you testified that it seemed like it was a crime scene at that point.
Yes, ma'am.
You approached Miss Jessica and started talking to her shortly after that.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know you mentioned about a turnout coat. Is that a pretty big firefighter coat?
Yes, ma'am.
You took that coat and placed that to give additional warmth to Jessica.
Right.
As well as I believe there were blankets there also.
Yes, ma'am. The blanket was around her first, and my turnout jacket was laid over it.
Yes. And that was to provide her with additional body heat,
Yes, ma'am.
comfort, that type thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this EMR terminology patient assessment?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, if you will, you indeed wrote out a report.
Yes, ma'am.
Your testimony earlier is that Jessica appeared to be a fighter. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And I believe you said she was also trying to tell you who she was. You agree
Yes,
with
ma'am.
that? Okay. And would you also agree that she was trying to tell you who did this?
Yes, ma'am.
Go about 7 lines down.
At this time, as my patient assessment, I asked, baby girl, can you tell me your name? She replied, Jessica Chambers.
Okay, and I'm going to stop you there. Did you put that language, baby girl, can you tell me your name? She replied, Jessica Chambers. That's all in quotes.
Yes, ma'am.
Keep reading for me.
At this time, I knew her airway was stable and her level of consciousness. Heard radio traffic at the time, MedStat was on scene. At that time, I comforting her and maintained her conscious. I asked, who did this to you? She replied, Eric.
Keep going.
I then said, baby girl, what's Eric's last name? She replied, Eric. My thoughts, it was like she thought I knew him or knew who Eric was.
Now, thus far in what you're reading and what you prepared in your report back then, you actually spelled out the name Eric, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And is Eric also in quotes in what you just read?
Yes, ma'am.
How was Eric spelled?
As far as I know, ERIC.
Yes, that's what you have in your report, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Continue reading for me.
I asked again, baby girl, who did this? She replied, Eric, again.
So that's what you meant by the fighter part. She was continually trying to talk to you, correct?
She was doing her best.
Yes. Okay. And what she did was to tell you the name one more time, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
See where it says at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Start reading there for me.
At that time, Panola County Sheriff's Office investigator made scene. I reported no one else in vehicle and nothing like a purse or anything visible. And the only thing odd was a can of Freon in the passenger side rear floorboard. I told him everything that's stated above on what she personally told me as a patient.
Now, at some point, there was some additional information that you had gotten about a tag number.
Yes, ma'am.
And that would have been from a person that both yourself and you communicated quite a bit with, I believe it was Will Turner.
Yes, ma'am.
And both of you are from Cortland Fire Department.
Yes, ma'am.
And this particular tag number of the person that was out there was suspicious enough for you to make note of that.
That's correct.
And so what happened was that a tag was gotten. You agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
And then that tag information, I believe, was conveyed to Daniel Cole.
That's correct.
I attended the witness, Your Honor.
All right. Redirect.
Nothing further, Your Honor. He may be filing excuse.
All right, sir. Sir, you may be found excused. You may remain in the courtroom. Your choice. All right. Let me call your next witness.
All right, state your name for me.
Shane Mills.
And Mr. Mills, are you a member of the Cortland Fire Department?
Yes, sir.
And were you a member of the Cortland Fire Department on December the 6th of 2014?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you in fact respond to a call of a car fire on Heron Road?
Yes, sir.
Tell us what you observed. Tell the jury what you observed when you arrived on the scene.
When I arrived, I kind of, the road's real narrow. So I parked kind of down the hill. And that way, if oncoming traffic or something come, they could see, something's going on. And I have my turnout gear in my vehicle. So I took my turnout gear out and I walked up the hill there to the back of the engine, which the engine, the pumper, the tanker, fire truck. And I put my gear on, I put my pants on, and I noticed Cole there to the left of me. And he was kneeled down in a kneeling position beside who at the time I didn't know was Jessica.
So you saw the young woman.
Yes, sir.
Do you know Jessica Chambers, or did you know Jessica Chambers?
Yes, sir.
Did you recognize this woman as Jessica Chambers?
At the time, I did not.
Describe for the jury what you saw when you first got there.
One of the worst things you could imagine. I mean, you can't. I can't picture it for y'all. She was burning. Her hair was, beautiful blonde, and you look at it at the time, and her hair's just it's fried.
Who was kneeling with her?
Cole was.
And I'm assuming she was on the ground.
Yes, sir.
What was Cole saying?
He was holding her hand. He was standing there, just hang on, just please. We have help. They're coming. I promise you.
Did you ever hear anyone ask her who did this to you?
Not that I can recall.
Did you ever speak directly to Jessica?
No, sir.
Did firefighters begin to respond in droves?
Oh, it was, yes. I mean, it was just one after another, and it was people running over people. It was people everywhere,
What about
And-
non-firefighters?
Yeah.
I mean, they see fire trucks, you know, we call them rubberneckers up here. People want to look and see what's going on, you know. But
We got plenty of them, don't we?
yeah,
Did you have plenty of them out there that night?
yes, sir.
Was the sheriff department on scene when you got there?
No, sir.
Did y'all try to secure the area as best as possible?
Yeah, to an extent, not really, because when everything's going so fast, you know, it's hard. You know, you're kind of in a tunnel vision, you know. But once we kind of realized what was going on, then yes, because then everybody was scared, you know.
Why were you scared?
Well, I mean, you're sitting here looking at a lady that's burned. You know, there's a car. You don't know if, you know, somebody did it, what happened, you know, what the case is, you know, and then
Would I be accurate in saying everybody was on high alert?
very,
Y'all looking around,
very.
watching everything?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I'll move on.
I'm overrule the objection. I think that's harmless leading. You may continue.
At one point, did you leave Cole and Jessica?
What'd you say now?
At one point, did you get away from Cole and Jessica?
At what point?
At one point.
Oh, yes, sir.
And why did you leave Cole and Jessica?
To catch my breath. And you know, I put my turnout jacket on and kind of walked away and kind of stepped away, looked at the car. You know, I didn't physically go up to the car. You know, I was kind of at the roadside. Because when you see something like that, me personally, I can't just hover over something.
Once MedStat was able to take care of Jessica, what did you do? What did you do after that?
They said that they was going to try to fly her to the med. So we had to set up a LZ, and what that is a landing coordinates for the helicopter to land.
While you were on the scene with Cole and Jessica, describe the noise level for the jury.
Well, I mean, you have like where she was laying was at the back of the engine, which is the pumper, right? And you know, you have engines running. You have the engine running. You have the pump on the truck running. You have another brush truck, that pump's running. You have cars coming up. You have sirens. You have, you know, people coming up. What's going on? You know, what we need to do. Where do we need to go? You know,
Was everybody trying to help?
yes, sir. For
Now,
the most part.
When you say the diesel engine's running, and then you talk about the pump, is the pump noise in excess of the diesel engine, or is it
Yes,
all
sir.
the same? I'm
No,
not familiar.
sir. You have the engine off of the fire truck, and then you also have a pump on the brush truck. It's you know, it's got a little tank, and you have a manual. You have a pump you have to crank up on it as well.
Is that the power generated to spray the water?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you were there with Cole, did you hear Cole talking to Jessica?
Yes, sir.
And was Jessica attempting to respond?
Yes, sir.
Could you understand anything of what she was saying?
I could not.
Were you able to make out any words from Jessica standing where you were?
No, sir.
As she was trying to speak, can you describe the tone of her voice?
Well, I really couldn't understand what she was saying from where I was at. You know, like Cole was kneeled down in a kneeling position holding her hand, and he had his head kind of turned, you know, to where he could try to hear her. But it was, you know, her trying to speak, trying to talk, it was very faint because, like I said, where I was at was right beside me. I couldn't understand what she was saying.
Your Honor, I attend to the witness.
Cross.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Redirect.
While you were there with Cole, did you lean down while Cole was talking to Jessica?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
As far as he was in a kneeling position, and I kind of squatted down.
Cole was closer to her than you were.
Yes, sir.
Now, just to get your role out in front of this jury, you were there to help everybody, right?
Everybody, anybody that needed help, that was my job.
Did you first attempt to help Cole?
Yes, sir.
And were you the primary person handling the fire?
No, sir.
Did you go to help them?
Yes, sir.
I believe your statement says you helped MedStat
Yes, sir.
and you helped the helicopter. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have for this witness. I would ask you to be finally excused.
All right, so you're finally excused. You may remain in the courtroom if you'd like, sir. You can leave. Thank you.
What is your name?
Will Turner.
On December the 6th of 2014, did the fire department get a tone out concerning a car fire?
Yes.
And describe for the jury, please, what you observed upon your arrival on the scene.
As I pulled up on the scene, I didn't know the girl at the time. She was at the corner of the fire truck. They were trying to get her on the ground. I knew she was severely burned. Her hair was froed. I assisted with getting her on the ground. Then I observed the car on fire in the bushes, and I went and assisted my other firefighter with that car, getting it extinguished.
All right. When you say you knew she was burned, describe what you saw. Did you know Jessica?
I did not know Jessica.
Describe for the jury her appearance as you saw it when you got to the scene.
She was burnt very, very badly. Her face was burned. The inside of her mouth was burned. Her hair, her arms. She didn't have any clothes. The only clothing she had on was panties. And her body was charred. It was just black skin hanging off of it, burnt skin.
You ever seen anything like this before, Will?
No, sir.
Okay. So if I understood what you said a minute ago, did you assist with her getting on the ground?
I helped get her on the ground, get the blanket on her, and then I left Brandy Davis, Jody Morris, and Cole Haley with her, and I went and helped Seth Cook with the car fire.
Did you have any conversations with Jessica or hear any conversations with Jessica?
I did not. I did go back and try to talk to her, but it was too many people around. Everybody was asking her questions. I just tried to ask her name, who did it, and I couldn't make anything out. It was too many people around, and I couldn't hear their conversations. It was too much commotion, so I just backed off.
All right, you said too much commotion. What do you mean by that?
Just the EMTs and the other firemen that were there trying to talk to her and get her packaged up and keep her conscious. It was just too much commotion.
Was there a lot of noise?
There was a lot of noise
And where was the noise coming from?
around her.
Okay. Was there noise coming from the trucks?
The trucks were running. There was noise coming off the trucks.
You also saw somebody there at the scene that concerned you. Is that correct?
I did.
Tell the jury about that.
This was after the chaoticness had kind of settled down a little bit. I was standing between the Pope's rescue truck and our engine 81, and a middle-aged black male walked up, and I told him, I said, "Hey, man, you can't be here. This is a crime scene. You need to leave." He never said a word to me. He gave me a stare that I've never seen before. He stared straight through me. I told him again, I said, "Hey, man, I need you to leave. This is a crime scene. If you don't leave, I'll get a deputy to escort you out of here." Never said a word, just blank stared through me. He was looking towards where the car was at and in the woods the whole time. He turned around and began walking off and looking over his shoulder back to where the car was at. He had a blue shirt on, and by the time he got out of my sight, he had a white T-shirt on.
And did you notify anybody about
I
this?
did. Brandy Davis was there, and I told Brandy, I said, "We need to try to get a tag number or something," and Brandy said, "I got that." Brandy told me he got a tag number and handed it over to Daniel Cole, and I had already told Daniel Cole before he gave him the tag number about the suspicious male.
Would you describe for the jury how Jessica, you said when you got there she was still upright, is that correct?
She was.
And how was she walking?
She looked more like a zombie. I mean, her arms were out. She looked like a zombie. Somebody off The Walking Dead is what I would picture it as.
And did you notice anything about her mouth or anything coming out of her mouth?
It looked like ashes coming out of her mouth when she tried to talk.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross?
Back on that day when you first got there, it was pretty much first responders.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that chaos that you spoke about pretty much had to do with so many trying to get there and assist her in some way.
That's correct.
Okay. Would be Cortland Fire Department, which you were on that, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then also, Pope.
Pope arrived after I got there.
Okay. And then also Daniel Cole was there as well.
Daniel Cole was there as well.
Okay. And you indicated that after that chaos with everyone trying to talk to Jessica and deal with her and comfort her, it was at that point that you noticed that there was someone suspicious.
It was a good while after that. Yes, ma'am. It was, I don't remember time frame, but she was already transported by helicopter at this point.
And first responders were still there?
The first responders were still there.
You completed a statement. You wrote that out back at that time. You
Yes,
recall that?
I do.
Okay. Obviously, something bothered you about seeing, I believe you indicated it was an older black male. Something about that bothered you that day.
I indicated he was a middle-aged black male.
If you will, please, just go down a little bit in your statement. Do you see where it said he then looked at the woods?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, start reading there for me.
He then looked at the woods in front of the car like he was looking for something. I told him again he had to leave. If he didn't want to, I would get a sheriff deputy to escort him off. The man then turned and gave me the same look as before and started walking back down the road. As I watched him start walking, I noticed him keep turning around and looking up in the woods by the car.
Okay, and so you mentioned twice that he kept looking back in the woods, looking beyond where the car was.
Yes, ma'am.
One more sentence for me.
I told Brandy Davis something just wasn't right about him. He seemed suspicious.
I tender the witness, Your Honor.
Right. Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. You may be fine.
All right, sir, you may be finally excused. You can leave or you may remain in the courtroom. Your choice.
Thank you.
Start, Mr. Hale.
Would you tell me your name, please?
Sandra Haley.
And Miss Haley, are you a member of the Pope Fire Department?
Yes, I am.
And along with your husband, Thomas Haley, who we'll hear from shortly. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you respond to the call on Heron Road on December 6th of 2014?
Yes, I did.
Who were you riding with that night?
I went POV with my husband and my grandchildren.
All right. Tell us what POV is.
Personally owned vehicle.
You went in your own car.
Yes, I did.
And you said you had 3 grandchildren with you.
Yes, I did.
And when you arrived on Heron Road, did you give them any instructions?
Stay in this truck. Do not get out.
Did you know what you were headed down there for?
A car fire.
Did you and your husband exit your personal vehicle that night?
Yes.
And describe the scene of what was going on for this jury.
When I first got there,
Yes, ma'am.
and got out of the truck, we walked up the hill a little bit and I stopped at the stretcher because they were transferring Jessica from the ground to the stretcher. And I just assumed that being on the road that the stretcher would move, like if you bumped it or whatever. So I stood there to help hold the stretcher.
Now, this area, is it a flat area of the road?
No.
Okay. Would you say you were on an incline?
Yes.
Did you assist in holding the stretcher?
Yes.
Tell me where you were situated in regards to the stretcher, and who else do you recall being around?
And Daniel Cole was at her head, and I was on the side of her head, and my husband was on the right side of me, and Brandy Davis was on my left shoulder.
When you say your left shoulder, what do you mean by that?
He was standing right here, kind of right here behind me.
Behind you? Okay. Now, was anybody trying to talk to her?
Yes.
Do you know Jessica Chambers?
I met Jessica at the ball field when she was a little bitty girl.
Did you know her as an adult or
No.
a teenager?
No.
Tell me what kind of condition that this girl was in.
I was not paying attention to her condition. I was just trying to help do what I could.
What could you see? What did she look like?
Again, I did not pay attention to what she looked like.
Okay.
It was dark there too.
Yes, ma'am. While you were standing there, was either you or Daniel attempting to speak to Jessica?
Not at first. They was trying to put a blanket on her, and Daniel kept saying, "Don't cover her face. Don't cover her face."
And what else was Daniel trying to do?
He was trying to take a picture.
And did you assist him in taking the picture?
I did. He had some papers in his hands. I took the papers, and I had pulled the blanket back so he could get a picture. And I said, "Why are you taking a picture?" And he said, "For identification."
What was Brandy Davis saying behind you?
He kept saying, "What's her name? What's her name?" So I asked her, I said, "What's your name?"
When you asked her, where were you situated in regards to her face?
Okay, she was facing west, and I was standing on the east, so I was kind of behind her.
Were you standing up or did you have to lean down?
Well, I was trying to talk to her standing up, but I couldn't hear what she was saying, so I bent over.
Was she trying to talk?
She was.
Tell the jury, describe her voice for the jury.
Well, you couldn't hardly hear her. I mean, you got so much noise going around, and you're asking her questions, and she's trying her best to answer you.
And you just stated that you asked her name.
I asked her her name.
Tell me how you heard her response and how loud was it?
Well, the second time I asked her, "What is your name?" I had to bend down real low, turn my head, and I heard her say Jessie. So I jumped up and I looked at Brandy. I said, "Brandy, Jessie, Jessica." And somebody from the crowd over on my left hollered, "Jessica Chambers." So I looked at her and I said, "Is your name Jessica Chambers?" And she shook her head, yes.
Was Brandy trying to ask any other questions?
Well, I heard him asking her, "Who did this to you?"
Did you ask that question to her?
Yes, I did. I kept saying, I said, "Who did this to you?" I said, "Honey," I bent down. I said, "Honey, who did this to you?" And all I heard was Eric.
Okay. What was the tone of her voice at this point?
You still couldn't hardly understand nothing she was saying, but you had to listen carefully.
And you were sitting right, you had your ear right to her.
Oh, yeah, honey, I trying to find out who did this to her.
And where was Brandy standing at that time?
He was still on my left shoulder.
Behind you?
Right?
Were you ever present when she and Brandy had a conversation?
No.
Tell the witness.
Well,
I attended the witness, Your Honor.
thank you. Redirect? What instructions would you give this witness?
He may be fine excused.
All right, Mr. Taylor, you are fine excused. You may remain in the courtroom if you'd like. Your choice.
What is your name?
Casey Austin.
Did you or were you a part of the Pope Volunteer Fire Department at that time?
Yes, sir.
Did you or do you recall getting a tone out to respond to Heron Road in Cortland?
Yes, sir.
And describe for the jury, please, what you observed. Let me ask you this first. How did you get there?
I went in my personal truck.
And describe for the jury, please, what you observed upon your arrival on the scene.
Once I got on scene, of course, my paramedic kicked in. I went straight to the patient. I noticed the car to the side, but the fire department, Cortland, was handling that. So I went straight to the patient and began doing my assessment. She was laying behind the fire engine, had a blanket and stuff on her. So I'd started seeing what I could do to help her.
Would you describe her condition when you arrived there? You said you began to do an assessment. What was your assessment?
I started trying to do it quick. I wasn't there, but just a little bit before the ambulance actually got there, they pulled up behind me. Mainly just trying to get what her mental status was and airway condition, just things that we look for as a paramedic. Overall, just looking at her, I could tell she was just badly burnt, globally across her body, severely. She did have a blanket on. I picked the blanket up to make sure to check for the burns and everything. And about the time I got to that point, that's when the ambulance was pulling up, and I went to assisting and giving a report to the ambulance crew, and we started working as a team from there.
Describe her burns to the jury.
Noticed just second, third degree burns from head to toe. The only thing she had on that looked like it wasn't burned at the time was her panties. Circumferential across her chest, just all around her, down her arms and legs.
Did you know Jessica?
I did not.
Did you actually attempt to talk with her?
I did. I did more so once we got in the ambulance than when it was out on the scene. Somebody else was, I can't recall who, but somebody was already talking to her on scene. I was looking more at her body and figuring out what to do. Once we got in the ambulance, away from the engine noise and everything, I talked to her more there.
All right, describe for me the noise situation when you got there.
Just engine noise, like fire engine when it's running, pumps running and stuff. It's you just got that loud hum of the engine.
Okay. So when the other paramedics that are on duty get there, I believe it was one paramedic and then one EMT. What did y'all do as far as beginning care for her?
We went ahead and loaded her up to get her out of the weather, back into the back of the truck where we have heaters. Obviously, burns, patients get cold. We removed the blanket that the fire department had on her and began putting sterile burn blankets on her. We, like I said, in the truck, we continued our assessment and treatments, attempting an IV access and getting fluids to her. No success with that.
Why were you not having success getting an IV in her?
Well, I didn't try. I was more so up toward the head. The paramedic on duty was trying. When the arms is just burnt like they are, it's just hard to localize a vein.
Okay. And there's another method in which you can get an IV in. Is that correct? If you can't get a vein?
Yes.
And that's directly into the bone?
Correct.
Well, what is that called?
That's intraosseous. It's we call it IO for short. It's just it's vascular access by drilling into the bone to the central canal of the bone.
What other steps were y'all taking besides trying to get a vein in her, or excuse me, an IV in her vein, and then also getting the sterile burn blankets on her? What else were y'all doing?
It was mainly the blankets. We applied oxygen to her, high flow oxygen with a non-rebreather at 15 liters. The EMT on board applied that, and really by that time, we were getting ready to transport her over to the landing zone.
Okay. And you mentioned a moment ago that you tried to talk with her in the ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the jury about that, please.
Once it was kind of to my realization that this wasn't an accident, I was asking her, I was trying to ask her name. She was kind of repeating more that I'm cold is mainly the main response I got. I asked her, who done this to you? The response I got was what sounded to be a Eric or Derek sound to it. Like I said, with her mouth and sucking in the heated air and stuff. She was kind of hard to understand.
Well, let me ask you this: could you tell at the time that she had actually probably sucked in heated air?
We did notice soot, burns and stuff in her mouth, just like an inhalation burn.
Was she talking just like you and me right now?
No, it was a little bit harder to understand. Just a little slightly garbled, and it's harder to understand her.
What about her? Was she in shock yet, or going into shock? Can you describe that for the jury, please?
I mean, she was definitely mentally shocked. When you asked her questions, she would kind of repeat herself. She wouldn't answer the questions. Like I said, I asked her who done it, and she told me that. I asked for her last name or skin color, and she would just respond with "I'm cold." Every question from then on, the response that she gave was "I'm cold," and so we continued care from there. And I believe that's when the deputy stepped in the truck and took over that. So I moved on to patient care.
And were you with the other? You said y'all working as a team. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did y'all, or were you part of the transport team down to the landing zone?
Yes, I stayed in the truck with her.
Okay. And do you recall how long it was before the helicopter got there?
I want to say they were coming into the ground about the same time we were pulling up. It wasn't long at all. I couldn't tell you an exact time, but
it didn't seem like it was very long.
No.
Okay. What is the protocol once the helicopter arrives? Who actually takes over treatment of Jessica?
Usually the helicopter crew would get in the back of the truck. I then stepped out of the truck because it's limited space, and I let the on-duty paramedic, as far as giving a report to the helicopter crew, they handled it from there. But once the helicopter crew got there, I stepped out.
But is it typical that when they get there, they basically take the scene over?
Typically, they start care. From one standpoint, though, as long as the patient's still in the back of the truck, it's still MedStat's patient. But once everything's signed over, the air vac crew took over from there.
And once you were able to take the blanket off of her in the back of the truck, were you able to get before y'all put the sterile burn blankets on, were you better able to get assessment of or how much of her body was burned?
Correct. We were in the back of the truck. Obviously, there's more light to see, and so yeah. I mean, it was once we took the blankets off, started replacing with sterile blankets. We could tell it was pretty significant burns.
It was pretty what?
Significant.
And where were the burns located?
Just pretty much from what we could see, from what I can recall, it was head to toe, except for like I said, where her panties were.
Tend to the witness, Your Honor.
Cross? All right, redirect.
No, Your Honor. He may be filing excused.
All right, sir, you're free to go. You may remain in the courtroom if you'd like. Your choice. All right, sir.
Speaking that microphone for me, Dave. What is your name?
David Gamble.
And David, are you a member of the Pope Volunteer Fire Department?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. On the evening of December the 6th of 2014, did you hear the tones concerning a fire in Cortland?
Yes, sir, I did.
What made you get up and go?
Just I guess you would say the panic and the firefighter's voice on the radio. I didn't know what situation. I mean, it's a brotherhood with us firefighters, to have each other's back.
Well, you just said something that the panic in the voice. Could you tell from who you were listening to that this wasn't a normal scene?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What did you find upon your arrival on Heron Road?
Upon arrival on Heron Road, I pull up to the scene. When I get there, at the back of engine 81, Jessica Chambers is At the time, I didn't know who it was. She was laying on the ground, covered with a blanket, some a pair of turnout coats, which is one of our heavy coats that we wear when we go on structure fires. That was laid over her. Started towards Cole to find out what they needed, and you could see the distress in his face of what he had seen, and kind of come back, ask, what you need us to do. And I can't remember if it was Daniel Cole or one of the med stats. I don't remember. They said we needed to set up what we call a LZ, which is a landing zone.
Okay, let me stop you a minute, David. When you got there, Jessica was on the ground. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you hear people asking her who did this to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you hear her give a response?
From what I could hear, it sounded like she said Eric. Now, the burns to her face and her body, it was hard to understand, what exactly she was saying.
Okay. But it sounded to you like Eric. Is that
Yes,
correct? Describe for me what she looked like to you as you were standing there. Could you tell that she was burned?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell whether or not the burns were serious or not serious?
Yes, sir. You could tell they were
Describe that for the jury, please.
They were very serious. Her hair was all singed out and everywhere. Her face, her mouth and lips were black, charred, looked like charcoal, in a grill. The skin inside of her nose, every time she breathed, you could see it come out and then go back in while she was gasping, trying to breathe.
And was her voice very loud when she talked?
It wasn't, but there was a lot of, without being on the fire department, you have a diesel engine truck that's sitting there running and pumping water, and it's a lot of noise around it. So, I mean, as far as being loud, like me and you were talking, no, it was not loud.
And you were asked, I believe you testified a moment ago, were you asked at some point to set up a landing zone?
Yes, sir.
And where did y'all decide to set this landing zone up?
They decided that they wanted the landing zone set up at the church right next to Cortland Fire Department. I think it's Cortland Baptist Church, I think. They got a big parking lot right there by the railroad tracks. They asked us to get a LZ, get the coordinates for GPS to the to dispatch, so air evac would know where to land at.
That's a good. You bring up a good point. I'd like for you, because until this, I wasn't really exactly sure how it worked, and on some of the jurors may not be. When you talk about setting up an LZ or a landing zone, what exactly is involved in that?
When you set up a LZ or landing zone for a helicopter come in, you have to, they fly all by GPS coordinates. So, and our radios, several of the radios have a GPS function. You can do it with your phone or with the radio, and you can call in and tell them exactly longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates of where you want them to be at. And when you go there, you look for obstructions that may hinder them landing, power lines, tree limbs, stuff like that. You need a large area because of the wind.
Tend to the witness, Your Honor.
Cross.
When you got there to the scene, basically there were just paramedics and firefighters from Cortland and Pope and just a lot of first responders there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And right after this happened, this would have been on a Saturday, you gave a short statement about what happened, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
If you will, read your statement out.
Arrived on scene, had young girl covered with blanket on ground, and she was not on fire at the time. That is not correct. No, I scratched out. With blanket on ground and fire turnouts, which they had covered her with the turnouts. At back of engine 81, CD1 was asking name, said her name was Jessica Chambers. CD1 asked who did this. She said Eric. And CD1 asked last name. She said did not know. Medstead state with loading with patient to be airlifted by air evac. Assisted Medstead.
So at the time you wrote this, at least these facts you recalled for sure.
Yes.
I attended the witness.
Redirect.
Those Swedish maybe excused to go on vacation.
All right, sir, you're fine. Excuse. You may remain in the courtroom if you wish. Your choice.
Oh, that.